Hi, this is JPlace, and today we're back with another tower guide, and today we'll discuss the Reverse Orb Devo strategy. So as someone who's well known for running various Orb Devo strategies, and who have created several guides of this in the past, such as Orb Devo guide and Free Up Orbless to the X strategy, where I did Free Up Orbless to Orb Devo, it may not be a surprise that I'm creating a guide on another Orb Devo approach, and this one focused on the late game strategies. And before we start, because I've learned from the previous guide, if you are less than 1 quadrillion in your lifetime coins, you're probably better off checking the Orb Devo guide, and if you haven't unlocked all ultimate weapons yet, you may be better off checking Free Up Orbless guide. But feel free to stick around to learn more about what the future may have in store for you though. So today, we'll be covering a Reverse Orb Devo, or Swirly Orb Devo as it also is known as. So first of all, what is it? Well, Reverse Orb Devo is a late-game sync farming strategy that uses permanent Chrono Field and Chrono Loop, so the CF+, to hoard enemies outside the tower range, which later will be killed during the Black Hole activation by Orbs. The way that this strategy works is with the powerful slow effects from CF and CF+, and the synergy it holds with other forms of crowd control. Enemies will make a slow entry towards and outside of your tower range, and this cycle ends once the black hole activates and pulls them into the orb line, killing the enemies. What this achieves is preventing enemies from being killed by your tower until your econ ultimate weapons and golden bot all activate together for massive coin gains. The concept for this strategy works in a similar way to regular Orb Devo, except in reverse. That is why the strategy is usually referred to as a Reverse Orb Devo. In regular Orb Devo, enemies are hoarded onto the tower or your wall and are then pulled out by Black Hole into your orbs. Whereas for Reverse Orb Devo, enemies are hoarded away from your tower but are pulled inwards by Black Hole to be killed by the orb line. And note that for most of the time in this guide, it will assume that you're approaching Reverse Orb Devo as Glass Cannon, but it is worth keeping in mind that it can also be achieved as Effective Health or Hybrid, and I will cover relevant variations when relevant in relation to such, but you can assume that the default and main build that you want to aspire for with this is a Glass Cannon approach. And just so it's clear, when I refer to Glass Cannon, I basically mean a build where you in theory could run with 1 HP and it wouldn't have differed or impacted the performance of your run, because you're not taking enemy hits and you rely on energy shield and crowd control to survive towards the end of your runs. Before we get into all of this, why is Reverse Orb Devo so great? Why should you care? Well, all of these things are going to become clearer as we proceed through the guide, but to summarize why this strategy is so good is because it's an amazing way to transition from effective health and where you can largely also circumvent a hybrid pot. And the reality of the game is that for Legend Tournament, you essentially need to run as Glass Cannon to perform effectively, and the same can be said for higher tiers for farming too. And importantly for many, this strategy will also finally enable you to realign your tournament and farming focus, especially so for the aforementioned Legend Tournament. The strategy also synergizes with initial great mastery cards such as the Wave Accelerator and Intra Sprint Mastery, and enables you to push higher tiers sooner. It can also be played 100% AFK while still gaining the advantages of Devo sync strategies. Since enemies are hoarded outside of your tower range, you don't have to monitor and optimize tower damage like other Devo strategies that hoard enemies inside of the tower range. Its AFK nature also facilitates numerous short runs in higher tiers once auto restart run is unlocked in the vault with keys. And unlike regular Orb Devo strategies, you don't take damage for any normal enemies as you're not hoarding enemies on your wall or tower. The strategy achieves effective use of Black Hole Digestive farming method a lot earlier than many other strategies that generally require either maxing or reducing the death wave cooldown, and having a high Black Hole duration, and which will ultimately lead to greater coins compared to Galaxy Compressor. You also don't need to toggle your damage ultimate weapons on and off. The ultimate weapons such as Chain Lightning can remain active at full damage without impacting much of the strategy's efficiency. In fact, it may provide an advantage by eliminating protectors within your black hole that hinder orb kills. However, we'll get into some cases later on of when or why you may want to toggle some off anyway. The strategy is also viable for all build types, Effective Health, Hybrid or Glass Cannon, but importantly, it greatly synergizes and gets stronger with Glass Cannon, which is why it's an excellent approach to farming tier 12, 13, 14 and beyond. Reverse Orb Devo can also remain effective beyond tier 14, unlike other sync strategies that typically struggle past tier 11 without substantial investment in effective health builds. And for those who have followed my journey and previous videos, they'll know that I'm a big advocate for sync strategies. Sync strategies significantly enhance coin gains by ensuring enemy elimination occurs within the maximum number of coin multipliers. Even in the late game where ultimate weapons and golden bot have near constant uptime, golden bot still has a minimum 10-second downtime, which a synchronized approach with Reverse Orb Devo can overcome. And most of us also don't have a death wave that is up constantly. So by syncing, you ensure that most of your kills occur when all your main econ multipliers are active simultaneously. And since you're barely killing during the hoarding phase, you're not really foregoing any coins that a perma strategy would have gained. As a result, you will tend to make a lot more coins with a sync strategy versus a perma uptime strategy. Before we jump deeper into all of this though, as always, this may not be the strategy for you as there are so many variables in the game, and depending on your lab, cards, ultimate weapon, modules and so forth, the exact scenarios can look quite different, but I've tried to address most of these cases as well as I can. And for the various scenarios that I may not have covered, feel free to ask in the video comments. And this video will assume that you already know what Devo is and what regular Orb Devo entails, and will not cover these in much depth, but if you want a deeper introduction to that, check out my previous video guides such as the Orb Devo and Free Up Orbless guides. But so yeah, as always, there are some main requirements that I want to clarify up front, as there may be scenarios where this strategy is not helpful or relevant to you, and it goes without saying that everyone's tower is different, so take all the advice given here today with a grain of salt. Try tweaks that may benefit you and your tower, and feel free to ask questions. Next, let's cover the base requirements. And there are not really that many absolute requirements for the Reverse Orb Devo strategy, though there are many things you ideally have to enhance the strategy. But the main requirements are as follows. Firstly, you want Chrono Field and you want Chrono Field Plus. You need Chrono Field with 60-second duration and 60-second cooldown so that you have a permanent Chrono Field. You also need maxed Chrono Field speed reduction, including Ancestral Submodule effect for a total of 90% speed reduction. And lastly, you ought to have a developed Chrono Field Plus, ideally at level 4 or higher. However, note that I was able to transition to Reverse Orb Devo without having unlocked Chrono Loop myself. So while it will be better and more efficient with Chrono Loop, it's not necessarily an absolute must and could still be an improvement to your current strategy. And we'll talk more about this later, but the way you can make the strategy viable without CF Plus is with greater reliance on Shockwave to continuously knock enemies back before they reach your tower range. And getting Chrono Field Plus is of course easier said than done for many, as it requires you to have unlocked all your ultimate weapons, which took me almost a year personally. But what's so special about CF Plus? Well, what makes CF Plus so good and relevant is that it makes enemies take a non-linear path towards your tower, which increases the distance and time for enemies to reach your tower and tower range. And CF Plus also provides a hidden extra slow that is not displayed anywhere within the game, which increases as you get more and more CF Plus levels. This is why I ideally want this as part of the strategy. Secondly, in order for all the things covered so far to be effective, you need a low sync time on your Multiverse Nexus, which should be Ancestral. And generally speaking, the lower sync time the better, probably at 65 seconds or lower, but the lower the better. This is both so you have less time you need to keep enemies away from your tower range, and also to avoid reaching maximum enemies on screen. Personally, I have my Multiverse Nexus currently synced at 58 seconds, which is achieved with 80-second Death Wave, 100-second Golden Tower and 50-second Black Hole, plus Ancestral Substat that reduces the Golden Tower and Death Wave cooldown. But this strategy could be achieved with slightly higher or lower Multiverse Nexus sync times too, which we'll touch upon later. Thirdly, your golden bot should be in sync with your Multiverse Nexus for the extra coin gains. If you're not doing this, you're leaving a lot of coins on the table. And lastly, you will need to devolve your workshop, which I will cover in detail in a bit when we get to the workshop, but basically that there are certain stats you want to keep at either 0 or low in your workshop. So those are the things you really need. Next, let's cover the things you ideally have to make Reverse Orb Devo even better. If you have Golden Tower Plus, your Golden Tower duration is ideally longer than your Multiverse Nexus sync. If it isn't longer than your Multiverse Nexus sync, this strategy becomes less lucrative. The reason is that enemies hoarded between syncs won't add to your Golden Tower Plus multiplier because of the way Golden Tower Plus works. And I'll explain this more later in the video. And of course, you want decent econ ultimate weapons. Other things like GT bonus, GT plus levels, black hole size, black hole duration, and death wave quantity are important to have highly upgraded, but aren't as necessary for making Reverse Orb Devo work, in the same way that having a low sync time and strong CF and CF plus. But for example, a longer black hole duration means you will spend less time having to keep enemies outside of your tower range with Chrono Field. And it is also assumed that you have your econ ultimate weapon labs maxed or close to max, including Spotlight coin bonus, black hole coin bonus, death wave coin bonus, golden tower duration, and so on. Ideally, you have reached module level 161 for the 6th substat. However, this is not a core requirement, but what it helps achieve is just to make it easier to fit the Chrono Field speed reduction substat on your MVN, while also attending to your other desired econ substats. And as we'll get into deeper later, beyond Multiverse Nexus, you also ideally have and use the Black Hole Digester module. Even at Mythic, it likely will perform better than other generator module alternatives. And your Chrono Field range lab should ideally be maxed to ensure enemies are slowed for as long as possible and as far away from the tower range as possible. And although free up mastery is not a requirement, but it makes the strategy more viable depending on your stage of the game. For example, before you get the Workshop Orb Adjuster in the vault, you want to lock your orbs because these orbs will be too far outside of your tower at minimum range. And similarly, depending on the strategy, it may be nice to either lock bounce shot range or bounce shot chance to reduce enemy hits outside of your tower range. And it will be nice to lock the enemy attack level skips or enemy health level skips, depending on if you're approaching it as an effective health or as glass cannon. This strategy greatly synergizes with Wave Accelerator card mastery and Intrasprint card mastery. Enabling you to reach the max spawn rate of enemies sooner is important and very helpful. Because enemies get faster and faster over a run, they may eventually outspeed your speed reduction effects and get into the tower range before your Shockwave is ready to knock them back or your Black Hole is ready to suck them in. And while having more Chrono Field Plus levels will extend the duration of Reverse Orb Devo, having the max spawn rate of enemies as soon as possible in a run will allow this strategy to shine for as much time as possible. And Intrasprint will help you quickly skip the less efficient start of your runs. And it's not an absolute requirement to have damage-related masteries to pull off Reverse Orb Devo, even as Glass Cannon, and I have personally farmed as Glass Cannon with Reverse Orb Devo without having any damage masteries, but having it will enable you to move up higher tiers and progress with the strategy effectively. And the Workshop Orb Adjuster, unlocked in the vault with keys, enables you to use Workshop Orbs at 30 meter, which is otherwise impossible. This means you also don't need to lock and ban Workshop Orbs, and not just solely rely on the orbs from the extra orb card. And then just briefly some quality of life vault upgrades. So due to the nature of how Reverse Orb Devo works and how it benefits shorter runs, a nice quality of life upgrade would be the auto restart run upgrade in the vault. And having the damage cap slider also makes it easier to just set a certain damage and forget about it. The damage cap slider makes you able to adjust your damage output based on whatever you input on the slider. And the slider enables you to set your damage to a percent of wave health that increases gradually automatically. For example, if wave health is 2S and you set your damage to 1E10, you now have 2 billion damage and so on until you hit your maximum damage. And this can be particularly helpful for AFK strategies like this, where you do not need or want to micromanage your run and gradually damage increase. But even without the damage cap slider, if you start your runs with close to max stats, you will not kill that much inefficiently because enemies will mostly be outside of reach anyways. But what the damage cap slider enables you to do is to potentially also include smart missiles and spot missiles from the beginning in your run. But for your smart missiles though, these should ideally at least then be synced with your Multiverse Nexus for the most efficient setup. And before we get into a lot of more specifics, I think it's important to take one step back just to acknowledge and make clear that there are different stages of Reverse Orb Devo depending on your strength, ultimate weapons, your cooldown, and of course also that there are variations based on whether you're approaching this as EHP, hybrid, or glass cannon. And starting out, you can achieve the strategy with no Chrono Field Plus like I have done, where you're relying on the 90% speed reduction, shockwave, and the enemy speed damage trade-off. And this substat and shockwave helps overcome some of the lack of not having Chrono Field Plus. However, it is important to keep in mind that this is mostly viable and relevant for glass cannon players because of the enemy speed damage trade-off. In other words, if you're EHP, you don't want to suddenly take 2.5x more damage. But as a glass cannon, you're not concerned about how much damage an enemy does. And as you get stronger and when the downtime between your sync activations reaches around 10 seconds or less, and or your Chrono Field Plus may be at around level 6 or higher, you will no longer have to rely on Shockwave for the strategy to work. And the same can be said for landmine stuns, which you may not want later on, but perhaps need earlier in your progression. The reason you don't want to rely on Shockwave in the long run is because of so-called Shockwave Shotgun, which occurs when enemies are pushed behind bosses by Shockwave, then Black Hole activates, pushing enemies into bosses, which will slingshot bosses towards your tower and past your orb line, making them much more difficult to kill as glass cannon. And so overall, the way you can think of the progression is that you will have an increasing reliance on Chrono Field Plus and a reduced reliance on Shockwave as you proceed and develop. Then of course there will be different considerations depending on if you are EHP, hybrid or glass cannon, and I will try to cover those throughout the guide as well when relevant, but overall keep in mind that your end goal with this strategy should be to transition to glass cannon. Now let's get into the workshop. Because this strategy hoards enemies away from your tower and tower range, almost everything can be maxed, including many of the things that a regular Orb Devo strategy would keep at level 0, such as attack speed, multi-shot chance, knockback chance, rapid fire chance, and so on. And to be clearer, let's break it down for each of the 3 workshop tabs. For the attack workshop, you can basically have these at any level you desire, and you probably just want to keep it at whatever level where you at least can maximize your attack upgrades in tournament runs. But if you are respeccing for tournaments, then the main thing is just to at least have the levels in such a way that you max them in the farming run at least. And you generally want to farm at minimum tower range for better coin gains, and there are many reasons for this overall, such as less travel time, orbs killing more effectively and hitting bosses more, black hole covering your tower range larger, and so forth. And as we'll get into later, by using Black Hole Digester, you also ensure that tower range is blocked from being leveled by free upgrades, so you'll be able to easily keep it at 30 meters. And if you don't have the damage caps ladder, I suggest you try various low damage workshop levels that at least ends up being maxed later in the run. This is just to optimize and not kill too much by a bounce shot or similar early in the run, while still being able to kill the bosses and elites. However, if you don't care about squeezing out a few extra coins, you don't have to worry about this and can just make your damage workshop levels high from the beginning. And as you get more familiar with the strategy and as you get stronger, you may want to play around with locking bounce shot chance or bounce shot range. This helps ensure fewer kills outside of your tower range, but also a smaller bounce range can be important to block against stray fast enemies that may enter tower range before other enemies. By blocking the range, you prevent your bounces from traveling to enemies farther away inside your Chrono Field and killing them before sync activations, which can happen early on in runs when bullets can still kill enemies. For the defense workshop, your exact setup will depend on your priorities and build, but you can essentially max most stats. Personally, I like to have landmine related workshop stats at level 0 to reduce the potential damage that they will do to enemies, but they will be maxed later in the run. But then the enemies are also stronger. And what you end up locking will depend on your setup. Depending on your situation, you may end up locking any relevant combination of orbs, landmine chance, and shockwave size. Landmine chance can be locked for similar reasons to bounce range. After your black hole ends, landmines can be left behind, which can kill enemies before the next sync activation. I don't think this is a big issue though, and landmines are likely to just be helpful to you in the early beginnings of using the Reverse Orb Devo strategy, but as you get stronger and more familiar with the strategy, you may see if you want to ban landmine chance. For me, as someone who respecs for tournaments, this is not really much of an issue, as I also have the landmine related workshop stats at level 0, and they therefore don't really outscale enemy health. Secondly, unless you have the workshop orb adjuster, you want to lock orbs, simply so that these orbs don't appear and hover outside of your tower range, which will ruin your hoarded stack. Thirdly, as discussed earlier, shockwave size can become relevant to lock from leveling when your cooldowns are low enough and or your Chrono Field Plus is high enough. This would then help prevent so-called shockwave shotguns from happening. Otherwise, if you're still in the earlier stages of this strategy, it should be kept on and maxed so that your shockwave pushes the enemies to the edge of your Chrono Field range. What this shockwave size will look like may vary slightly for each of you as a result, but for me, with a max Chrono Field range, I max the shockwave size workshop and have 2 levels active in the shockwave size lab slider. For the utility workshop, you will max out all the stats except for enemy level skips, which is just simply too expensive to max. And as for enemy level skips, your priority here will just depend on whether you're EHP or glass cannon. For example, if you're a glass cannon, you will focus on leveling your enemy health level skips, and ideally you lock the enemy attack level skips so that your free utility upgrades will be leveling the enemy health level skips faster. And then vice versa if you're EHP. In my situation, I now have 400 levels in enemy health level skips and basically 0 in enemy attack level skips because I'm glass cannon. And I have enemy attack level skips locked, so that free ups max my enemy health level skips very early in a run at around wave 270. Then let's talk about cards. And the more card slots we have, the easier it is to ensure that we don't need to do any card swapping during our run. As for how many slots you need, it will depend on many things, including your build. You could pull off this strategy quite easily with 17 card slots, but having more would require fewer tweaks. As a glass cannon, you likely want to aim for 20 or 21 card slots, though the exact amount will greatly vary depending on what masteries you have available. For example, if you don't have Super Tower, Demon Mode, or Intro Sprint Mastery, then that's potentially fewer card slots required for you. That being said, let's first cover the most important cards and masteries for the build. There is no mastery that is absolutely required to make Reverse Orb Devo viable. However, because of the way that Reverse Orb Devo works, and that we will aim to move our farming towards tier 14, and that it will function better with slower enemies, our wave count will be a lot lower than what you have been used to on tier 10, 11 and 12. And this is where the strategy greatly synergizes with Wave Accelerator Mastery and Intro Sprint Mastery. Wave Accelerator Mastery helps us reach maximum enemy spawn rate sooner in a run, which you otherwise by default would only reach by wave 6500. Intro Sprint Mastery helps you skip a larger portion of the beginning of your run when few enemies spawn and coin income is comparatively low. As a glass cannon, gaining damage masteries such as Super Tower Mastery, Damage Mastery and Demon Mode Mastery will help you scale up your damage to make tier 14 farming more viable. There are of course a lot of other masteries that could be nice to have and that would boost your tower in various ways, but nothing that is truly a must. And of course, we've also talked about how the free upgrades mastery can help you lock certain stats that you may want or need. Technically speaking, there's only one card that you absolutely need to have, which is the extra orb card, as we need this to kill the enemies as they get pulled into black hole. But if you are in some odd situation where you got the workshop orb adjuster but with limited card slots, you could rely on workshop orbs instead and not need the extra orb card even. And of course, there are a lot more cards that we ideally use. We obviously got our default econ cards such as coins card, critical coins card for the increased coin gains. We got the cash card to make it easier to upgrade things in run, though the free upgrades will handle most of the upgrading. And if you have limited card slots, you could swap this out for whatever else you need later in the run. Then there's the wave skip card, the wave accelerator card and interest sprint card just to earn more coins and finish runs quicker. We got the enemy balance card to earn more by facing more enemies. We got the free upgrades card to boost your black hole digester coin bonus and to keep locks on whatever workshop stats that you have locked. Keep in mind that you can't really swap this out later in a run as you will lose the locks. And some solid cards you ought to have are also the plasma cannon card, just to make it easier to kill the bosses. And the slow aura card can help you give more time to kill bosses and elites. And these are a bit more build specific, but ideally you have the attack speed card for faster attacks and more chain lightning procs on elites and bosses, and more knockbacks on scatter and vampire enemies. You have the damage card, the critical chance card, the berserker card and the ultimate crit card, just for the extra damage. The energy net card to stun bosses so that your orb boss hits do more and your ultimate weapons can do more damage. The energy shield card to survive for longer as glass cannon. And as a glass cannon, you don't care about your health or regen, but if your situation is different as a hybrid or effective health, you may of course want health card, extra defense card and health regen cards too. And then some situational cards, the landmine stun card for additional crowd control and survivability later in your run, though you can assess as you get stronger if this is a card that you want to have enabled or not. And the recovery package chance card, which gives you extra charge if you have the RPC mastery. If you don't have the RPC mastery, this card doesn't really matter to you. And this is what my setup looks like with 20 card slots. When I had 19 slots, I didn't really have space for landmine stun, though I could place it in at the end of a run, for example to sacrifice some shards by taking out their RPC, but I didn't think that was worth it. And as I got 20 card slots, I was able to put the landmine stun card in again to help deal a little bit with the raise. But currently, my main issue are bosses and not raise just yet. In the future, I want to get Super Tower Mastery for more damage, also then I want to have a card slot for that too. That's why my initial card slot target is 21. But if I had gotten it to 22, I could have a lot more flexibility, such as dealing with event missions such as the Death Ray card or the new card mission, or use Second Wind and so on. So that was a fair bit on cards. Next, let's talk about modules. And before we get into specific modules and specific substats, it is important to highlight how it is recommended to have your modules levels at 161 or higher so that you can fit many of the relevant coin generating sub-effects on your ancestral MVN, on top of grabbing the necessary Chrono Field speed reduction, such as Golden Tower cooldown, Death Wave cooldown reductions, Death Wave quantity, Spotlight angle, and Golden Tower duration. But beyond Ancestral Multiverse Nexus and ideally Black Hole Digester, what other modules you use will depend on what modules you have available and what build you're going for. So let's get into it. So let's get the most obvious and required one out of the way first, Multiverse Nexus. This module is the reason that having level 161 is important, and it's the only core module choice that allows this strategy to work. It syncs your econ ultimate weapons and also takes off 10 seconds from the sync time, which is very beneficial for this build. The lower your sync, the better this build will perform and the more things you will be able to get away with. And for the MVN, all of the following substats are important. Chrono Field speed reduction. This is a key substat to making this Reverse Orb Devo strategy feasible, as it allows you to reach 90% slow on your Chrono Field Plus. It is also, as mentioned earlier, a method on how you can get away with going an early variant of Reverse Orb Devo without yet having Chrono Field Plus by utilizing Shockwave to a greater extent. But regardless of whether you have Chrono Field Plus or not, you want this substat. Then there's the Golden Tower cooldown and Deathwave cooldown. Reducing your overall cooldowns for more frequent syncs and less downtime, which may even result in less needed Chrono Field Plus, will make this strategy more viable for you. Keep in mind that whatever MVN sync time you're going for may dictate what rarities of the substat that you want, but generally speaking, you can't go wrong with just having it as low as possible. But say, for example, if I had Smart Missiles cooldown at 60 seconds, I would want to move up from 58 seconds to 60 seconds by making my Golden Tower duration substat to Mythic, so that these things would sync up together. And then you want the Golden Tower duration substat. Duration is great for Golden Tower Plus and makes it easier to reach the duration that is 1 second longer than the ambient sync time. However, if you don't have GT Plus yet, you likely instead would want Golden Tower bonus. And Spotlight Angle extends the range where Spotlight is effective, which makes more of your orb kills occur within the Spotlight beams. And lastly, Deathwave Quantity gives you a decent bonus to coins and sell income. For generator modules, your Black Hole Digester is the absolute best synergy for this build because of the free upgrades and low sync time. Even if everything is maxed, you still get the bonus for free upgrades that would have happened, and with a cumulative free upgrade chance of easily over 300%, you will have 30+% coin bonus. You could use Singularity Harness if you do not yet have Ancestral BHD, but even a Mythic BHD should outperform any other module of this strategy. And of course, just so it's clear, this strategy does not work with Galaxy Compressor, and you don't want to use that as you want some downtime for hoarding, and you will not achieve that by having Black Hole up permanently. And as for the sub-module effects for your BHD, ideally you have enemy health level skips, or potentially both enemy health level skips and enemy attack level skips if you're EHP or hybrid. You have the coins per kill bonus, free utility upgrades, free attack upgrades, free defense upgrades, and if you have the recovery package chance mastery, you also want the package chance, but if not, you do not really need that one. For armor modules, this will depend on whether you're glass cannon, hybrid or EHP, and whatever works best for you. However, the main end goal of this strategy is glass cannon, and then you want anti-cube portal for the increased damage. But if you are to approach this as EHP, then you likely would want to use Sharp Fortitude, or for some builds, they may see better results with Space Displacer or Negative Mass Projector. But again, your end goal should be to use anti-cube portal and as a glass cannon build, and these are the substats that you probably want on it. You want Shockwave Frequency, which is a great substat for ACP, and it can also help you achieve Reverse Orb Devo farming without Chrono Field Plus and at earlier tiers. However, if you have reached a point where you have developed CF Plus and Shockwave starts to become detrimental to your farming, you could swap it out for something else, but you'll likely want this substat anyways for your tournaments. And then both orb substats are helpful in allowing you to run Glass Cannon, as they can allow you to do large amount of damage to bosses with the orb boss hit lab. The stronger your CF and CF Plus becomes, the more effective these extra orb upgrades are going to help you out. However, without the workshop orb adjusters, these orbs will linger too far outside of your towers, so you only want these orb substats once you have that unlocked in the vault. And additional orbs will just overall increase the efficiency of Reverse Orb Devo, as enemies will be killed quicker after being pulled in by the black hole, which helps avoid any issues of maximum enemies on screen cap. And it is just overall beneficial for Golden Tower Plus users, where you want as many kills as possible during your Golden Tower Plus. And lower wall rebuild time in general is very beneficial for glass cannon builds, as it enables your wall to intercept chip damage more often instead of energy shields, and it also ensures that the wall is up more often to apply thorns to the bosses. And what you pick beyond these first ones is kinda up to you to some extent. You could go for landmine radius, with the landmine stun card, this could be helpful to stun ray enemies and also stun or hoard more enemies between sync activations. However, it can have a negative impact if your black hole size is not big enough, because it may increase your stun radius to a point where enemies are stunned outside of the range that they can be pulled in by black hole, which will mean a decrease in coins. You could overcome this with an increased black hole size though. Death Defy can be a viable option to extend your glass cannon runs. Landmine shrines could be relevant if you rely on landmines. And the one thing to keep in mind is that you will likely use your ACP for both farming and tournaments. So you will have to ask yourself what potential substats will also see you improve in tournaments. For example, a case can be made to consider knockback force or knockback chance as substats on your ACP. Overall, for armor modules, this is just an area where you gotta take into consideration what works best for you and your current build and your current armor modules. For cannon modules, you can largely go with anything except for death penalty, as this reduces your coin income because it reduces the amount of enemies you face and can kill inside your econ multipliers. Generally speaking, you may simply use whatever cannon module has the highest module rarity and ancestral star rating, so that your overall damage output will scale to a higher extent. And Astral Deliverance can be a great module to use for you, as it does a great amount of damage. However, as it synergizes with bounce shots, you may notice that you're doing too much damage and doing so outside of your tower range, especially as you get stronger. So at that point, you may simply consider using a cannon that is technically inferior to Astral Deliverance, but that is more consistent damage-wise, such as Havoc Bringer, Being Annihilator, or Shrink Ray. And for substats, you basically just want the 4 crit related substats, and thereafter it is very flexible. You want critical factor, you want critical chance, super critical multiplier, super critical chance, and thereafter it's kind of up to you in terms of the additional substats. Though you probably want to steer away from the bounce shot related substats, at least until you know what you're doing and are familiar with the strategy. This is just because you may ultimately want to end up by locking your bounce shot chance or bounce shot range in your workshop. Next, let's get into perks. While all build types can use this strategy, Hybrid and Glass Cannon can take further advantage by using the trade-off perk that reduces enemy speed by 44% in exchange for giving enemies 2.5x damage. Beyond that, what perks you end up banning and picking will just depend on your build and whether you're actively playing or being AFK. And giving an explicit list of what perks to take or not wouldn't necessarily be accurate or applicable to most, so let's instead cover various caveats and considerations. And we'll first approach it with the glass cannon in mind, as again, that's what the main end goal of this strategy revolves around. So you'll ban the normal glass cannon trade-off perks, you want to ban the 50-50 damage trade-off perk, you don't want reduced damage output, and you're not concerned about the amount of damage that enemies will do to you. You're not concerned about increasing or reducing enemy damage, as you anyways will be one-shot from bosses and rays, and normal enemies will not be hitting you. And you want to ban the knockback trade-off perk, just to help keep enemies, including Scatterer and Vampires, away. And then there are 2 that you may want to ban, but that you should test for yourself. You got the damage boss health trade-off perk. Personally, I've currently banned this because bosses are a bigger issue for me than ray enemies. However, when this will likely change in the future, such as after getting Workshop Orb Adjuster that will do greater percentage damage to bosses, then I don't want to ban this anymore, simply so that I get a bit more damage. And secondly, the boss speed health trade-off perk. For this perk that increases boss speed, this may be a perk that you're willing to take if the increased boss speed matters less than the decreased boss health. Currently, as I have a very weak CF+ and don't have the Workshop Orb Adjuster yet, I picked this perk because it's mostly stuns from Energy Net, Poison Swamp, and Inner Landmines that anyways are slowing down the bosses, so the increased speed matters little. But you may experience that the opposite is better for you. And then there's an additional 2 situational perk bans. The Orbs perk, if you don't have the Workshop Orb Adjuster, you also want to ban Orbs. And secondly, you may consider banning the Poison Swamp perk, just to avoid that Poison Swamp stun enemies outside of your Chrono Field and Black Hole. An alternative could also be to simply toggle off the stun effect of Poison Swamp, but then you would lose such ability against elites and bosses. But at least keep in mind that you risk that your Poison Swamp radius is too big, even without this perk. Personally, I'm banning the Poison Swamp perk, and I've only taken my Poison Swamp radius to level 14 to avoid it being too large. Though I'll eventually see if I want to increase it a handful more levels, but I'm just being cautious as I don't want to footgun my farming strategy, as there is no slider for the Poison Swamp radius. But of course, a larger radius would be nice for tournaments, so there are always trade-offs and considerations you have to make. Maybe you care less about optimizing your farm and more about optimizing your tournaments, then you can care less about the poison swamp radius. Then onto 3 good perks. The enemy speed damage trade-off perk simply reduces speed, and you're less concerned about increasing damage because you anyways will be one shot from bosses and raids, and the normal enemies will not be hitting you. The lifesteal trade-off perk helps you just reduce enemy health, which is nice. And the coin trade-off perk, of course you want to take this. And then with the glass cannon approach, the rest of the trade-off perks are essentially neither good nor bad and can be ignored and don't need to be banned. And those are the region trade-off perk. The lower health and higher region do not matter to you, as you will eventually be one shot by bosses and elites anyways as glass cannon. The cash trade-off perk doesn't really matter much. You only need to max out your enemy health level skips as glass cannon, and this is done quickly and also via free upgrades, so this doesn't really matter or impact you much. The range trade-off perk, this perk doesn't really do anything to you, assuming you have the black hole disabled range enemies lab that disables range enemies that are inside your black hole. And this is because the ranged enemies will always either be inside black hole or outside of your tower range, and as a result, their increased damage will have zero effect on you. And then let's just briefly talk about being active versus AFK in regards to perks. When you're actively playing, you naturally pick the perks yourself, and as a result you want to ban some of the more useless standard perks. And ideally, you have at least 4 or 5 ban perks available, so you typically will ban things such as interest, absolute defense, and other standard perks that you do not need. The reason for this is that these standard perks have 5 picks each, so when you ban them, your overall perk pool gets substantially smaller, which helps give you the perk options you need a lot faster in the runs. And as an active player, you can safely allow up to 3 game-ending trade-off perks, as then you can always pick a different perk if you have 4 perk options quantity. Whereas if you play largely AFK, and especially if you're using auto-pick perks, then you want to ban the perks that ruin your run that were mentioned earlier. The one final thing for you to keep in mind is that you will eventually max out the Inter-Sprint Mastery in your tower journey, which will last the first 1800 waves of a run. What this means is that you may be less concerned with having a long list of auto-pick perks, because the most important perk will have already been taken by wave 1800. And this is relevant to emphasize because you don't earn coins while Inter-Sprint is active. So just keep this in mind in relation to your own journey. So for example, if you want to AFK and are currently developing your Inter-Sprint Mastery, you may want to prioritize getting another ban instead of more auto-picks. And if you're watching this guide, you should already know what the good econ perks are, so it shouldn't require me to specifically say so, but obviously you want the main economy perks and you'd place those highest in the auto-pick ranking. So perk wave requirement, this should be your first choice. Coin trade-off perk, golden tower bonus perk, black hole perk, coins perk, death wave perk, the game speed perk, and you want the free upgrade perk due to its synergy with black hole digester, as it increases the likelihood of free upgrades, which again increases the likelihood of black hole digester increasing the coin bonus. And below those on the auto pick ranking, you just basically want whatever perks helps your run and strategy. Overall, I always fully run AFK for perks and currently have 7 bans and 11 auto-pick perks, but you can definitely manage with less. And the way I've organized my auto-picks are as follows. Econ related at the top, enemy speed damage trade-off perk simply as I don't have a very developed Chrono Field Plus, and my Inter-Sprint only goes to about wave 1000. So I want the reduced speed early so that I can earn better coins after Inter-Sprint has finished. And then I have some damage related auto-picks. The exact order I will continue to tweak depending on tier I'm running and so forth, and through various testing, but it doesn't really matter too much. And lastly, of course, as EHP build, your bans and priorities will basically look the opposite. You want to ban things such as the range trade-off perk, you want to ban the enemy speed and damage trade-off perk. This will be bad as they simply increase the damage you take. You want to ban the lifesteal trade-off perk. This will in most cases be negative as you are dependent on your region. If you have a wormhole redirect or a wall, or you depend on lifesteal to a greater extent if you're without. And you want to pick things such as the 50-50 damage trade-off perk and potentially the region trade-off perk. And overall, you can take a look at resources such as the trade-off perk advice depending on strategy for some quick overview of trade-off perks that you generally don't want or want based on your build. And this one on screen is created by Minionek, and I'll include a link to the relevant resources mentioned in the video description. Next, let's talk labs. There are not that many things to cover specifically, and we have covered most of these already indirectly. Obviously, as already covered, you want a permanent Chrono Field with a large Chrono Field range, and you want your Econ Ultimate Weapon labs to be strong. and ideally you have wave accelerator and intra-sprint to farm more effectively. But let's talk about a few specifically. First, shockwave size. Having shockwave size set to a range that is able to push enemies to the end of your Chrono Field range is important, so it may be worth labbing your shockwave size so that you have the freedom to adjust your shockwave to the correct size depending on the tower range you choose to farm at. For most though, you will tend to farm at minimum range with this strategy, so you don't need many levels in shockwave size for that. Then we got the Chrono Field range, and you want these 20 levels maxed, which will equal 60 meters. There is a tiny argument against maxing Chrono Field range because it supposedly zooms out the screen slightly so that enemies spawn further away, but the benefits in both tournament and for this strategy outweigh any such concerns. Then we got the orb boss hit. You want to make sure to max this to increase the amount of damage you can do to bosses. Eventually, with the Workshop Orb Adjuster, you can do significant damage from the card orbs and Workshop Orbs together. And then we got the Golden Bot. You want to lab your Golden Bot's cooldown and duration for increased coin gains. However, be careful about the Golden Bot cooldown in the lab. You want to have your Golden Bot cooldown in sync with your econ ultimate weapons, so if you take the lab too far, you could put yourself in an awkward position when trying to find a good syncing time that can match your Golden Bot too. If you have already maxed out your Golden Bot cooldown, it does not completely footgun you from being able to use this build, but it does make you more limited to the possible syncs between Multiverse Nexus and Golden Bot that you're able to achieve. Do note though that you can also gain back possible sync times by unlocking the Golden Bot cooldown sliders within the vault with keys, but this is very far into the vault and costs a lot of keys, so it's better to use as a last resort. You could also use the bot respec for 300 gems, which at least should enable you to reduce the cooldowns with medals in increments of 3 seconds. Beyond the labs mentioned and the Masteries already covered, there's not necessarily anything crucial other lab upgrades, but you have to consider your own situation of whether you have some untapped potential within your tower. For example, if your damage and critical factor labs are just level 20, you have quite a bit of good potential to increase your damage to enhance your Reverse Orb Devo, and so on. We've essentially covered everything there is to say about ultimate weapons, but let's recap of sorts. You want permanent uptime on your Chrono Field with max speed reduction. When you begin working on Chrono Field Plus, it should be brought to at least level 4 to feel its impact. Of course, for the future, the more Chrono Field Plus, the better. And so this means that for Chrono Field you want 60-second duration, which includes 30-second lab duration, and this will cost you a total of 2,825 stones. You want the 75% slow, making it 90% slow with the sub effect, and this will cost 2,910 stones. And you want 60-second cooldown, which will cost you 1,500 stones. And Chrono Field Plus level 4 will also cost 1,500 stones, plus the unlock costs. For Econ Ultimate Weapon cooldowns, you overall want a low MVN sync time, as mentioned many times already. And to find possible sync timings, you can use the MVN calculator in the Tower Tool website to figure out what MVN sync you have based on your current Ultimate Weapons or even cooldowns you would like them to be in the future. You will all currently have your Econ Ultimate Weapons at various levels though, so it won't make sense for me to depict the stun costs of this, but you can use the effective patch sheet or the stone calculator to calculate this for you. But for the cooldowns, you ideally have your Golden Tower at 100 seconds plus the substat. You ideally have your Death Wave at least 100 seconds, but ideally 80 seconds or 90 seconds plus the substat. And you have a Black Hole at 50 seconds. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, if you have Golden Tower plus the Golden Combo, you want your Golden Tower duration to be longer than your Multiverse Nexus sync. And I'll try to explain this in greater detail now. Overall, this is because your Golden Tower Plus only counts enemies that spawn after it has activated. So you can imagine that if your Golden Tower Plus activates while you have a hoarded stack on screen, then that hoarded stack will not count towards your Golden Tower Plus multiplier, which is what will happen every Golden Tower cycle if your duration is not longer than your MVN sync. But if your duration is 1 second longer than your MVN sync, it will include a lot more enemies. And not only that, but it will also mean that you now have permanent Golden Tower. In terms of MVN sync time, 100-second Golden Tower, 100-second Death Wave, 50-second Black Hole cooldowns is a common starting point for this strategy. However, it would mean that you would need 66 seconds of duration on your Golden Tower to meet the goal of having your Golden Tower duration be greater than your MVN sync. A more practical approach could therefore be to have your 100-second golden tower, 90-second death wave, and 50-second black hole, and getting your golden tower duration to 63 seconds. Or, as I have done, 100-second golden tower, 80-second death wave, 50-second black hole to take my MVN sync time to 58 seconds and my golden tower duration to 59 seconds. So I know this aspect about golden tower plus duration can be a bit confusing, so let's look more deeply at my example of 58 MVN sync and 59-second golden tower duration. As we can see on screen, the activation of the golden tower plus shifts by 1 second each cycle. At the start of the run, it will be off by 1 second, then it will be off by 2 seconds, and so on until it has done 58 cycles and start again. This means that every 59 time I will have Golden Tower Plus activate the same time as the Econ Ultimate Weapons, which is fine and a lot better than it activating simultaneously every cycle. And let's just do some math breakdown for you here to consider, assuming Ancestral Golden Tower and Deathwave cooldown substat, and assuming Ancestral Golden Tower duration, and assuming Black Hole 50 second and Golden Tower 100 second cooldown. And assuming a current Golden Tower duration of 52 seconds with the Ancestral 7 second duration substat. Most of that are reasonable assumptions, but your current Golden Tower duration may of course differ, but it is likely that it will at least be 45 seconds without the 7 second substat, so that it lasts the same duration as default Black Hole of 33 seconds, which many target to have for tournament reasons, and before the Black Hole duration cost becomes very expensive. So with that in mind, this will depict some of the considerations and will further explain my personal reasons for getting my Death Wave to 80 seconds in preparation for this strategy. With Death Wave at 100 seconds, it means 65 seconds sync, and it will then cost you 2,828 stones for Golden Tower duration to be longer than your sync time. If you have Death Wave 90 seconds, it means a sync time of 62, and it will cost you 874 stones for the Death Wave, plus 1900 stones for the Golden Tower duration to be 1 second longer than your sync time, so a total of 2777 stones. And then lastly, a Death Wave at 80 seconds and a 58 second sync time would mean a cost of 1562 stones for your Death Wave, plus 973 stones for your Golden Tower duration, which would be a total of 2535 stones. Now of course, if you already have a lot higher Golden Tower duration, that may mean that dropping the Death Wave cooldown is a lot less relevant to you, and you could be fine with Death Wave at 100 or 90 seconds. There are pros and cons with each approach naturally. With the longer Golden Tower duration, your Golden Tower Plus bonus will be larger. With lower Death Wave, you will need to keep enemies away for a shorter amount of time, and it may also include a tiny increase in cells due to the Death Wave triggering more often. And there is also the consideration of reaching the spawn cap of maximum enemies on screen. At max spawn cap, 8 enemies spawn per second on average, and that means that at 50 second downtime you will already have reached 120 enemies spawn. If you then have Black Hole that is 45 seconds with the Black Hole perk, it means that you would have 20 second downtime with a Death Wave at 100 seconds, which would hurt your combos and overall coin gain, whereas a Death Wave of 80 seconds would have a 13 second downtime. So all this explains why I personally went for Death Wave at 80 seconds. It was more efficient stone-wise, as well as overall addressing more things in the game. Sure, I'd love to get my Golden Tower Plus duration even longer in the future, but it's sufficient for quite a while now at 59 seconds. But so yeah, I hope this breakdown was somewhat helpful in your considerations. Personally, now with the Multiverse Nexus of 58 seconds, there will be a long time until I consider it relevant to reducing the Death Wave cooldown further, as the benefits will be very small for me. And for your Black Hole, you want a Black Hole to be large enough to cover most of your Chrono Field range, so at around 60 meter Black Hole for minimum range farming, and likely bigger if you wish to farm at higher tower ranges. Personally, I have my Black Hole size at 58, and it is missing a tiny portion of the Chrono Field range, but I've decided to wait with developing it, as it may become unnecessary once Chrono Field Plus will rotate enemies into Black Hole anyways. And beyond that, for ultimate weapons, you have to use some of your own judgment. And since you'll target to have Golden Tower Plus and Chrono Field Plus, this of course means that you will also have unlocked the other ultimate weapons, but their exact levels or cooldowns do not really matter much for the strategy to be viable. But of course, use your best judgment here. Naturally, having Inner Landmine stun is nice to stun bosses and gives you more time to kill them, and the same can be said for Poison Swamp stun. Or say you would want more than a tiny pencil of spotlight beam for the added coin gain, and so forth, but there are no hard requirements of any kind. Overall, as previously stated, you do not really need to toggle damage for your ultimate weapons on and off in a run. Ultimate weapons such as Chain Lightning can remain active at full damage without impacting much of the strategy's efficiency. However, when using smart missiles, synchronization with MVN sync or deactivation is advised, because unsynchronized smart missiles can exit the tower range and eliminate the hoard before the econ ultimate weapons activate, and the same can also occur for spotlight missiles. And if you're actively monitoring your runs, you may see a slight coin increase by leaving your chain lightning off at the beginning. But this is something you just have to test and also just consider how micromanaged you want to be about it, but you don't really have to do this. All of this gets a lot easier once you have the damage cap slider unlocked in the vault, then it becomes a lot easier to just fully set and forget the run with all ultimate weapons toggled on. And for Poison Swamp, you need to consider your tower range and your swamp radius to not create a potential footgun for yourself where your Poison Swamp becomes too big, and you may want to ban the Poison Swamp perk. Next, let's talk strategy. For this build, there is not much of a strategy really, as it's a setup that should enable you to basically 100% AFK your runs. And as a result, there is not any microing required at all to make this viable. However, of course, there are tweaks that you can test and things that you could do to enhance things, and you will have to check what tier works currently best for you. But starting off, you generally would just want to max out your enemy health level skips. This can be achieved quite early with free upgrades and unlocking your enemy attack level skips, but if you want to micro, you can also help add some levels manually to make it go even quicker, and you should be able to max it already at wave 300 or so. And when starting your runs, before you have the damage cap slider, you can turn off your chain lightning and smart missiles and possibly spotlight missiles to not kill much outside of your tower range. And then you can put these on when you start to struggle to kill bosses and elites. And you can experiment with starting with lower damage workshop levels to help reduce unnecessary early damage as well if you don't have the damage cap slider. And that's really it. It's so simple. The only really time-consuming aspect about Reverse Orb Devo is to gradually get the right substats, get the ultimate weapon sorted, and the Masteries. But there's not really much to learn or do in a run itself. It's largely set and forget, which is one of the many things that made me gradually prepare for Reverse Orb Devo and why I'm so excited about it. Of course though, if you have limited card slots, there may be some changes you want to do at some point in the run, but in and of itself, it's not something you have to do. But if you're trying this as a hybrid or EHP, you may end up needing to micro cards more possibly. And as for what tier is most efficient for you, you simply have to test, as it can depend on so many factors. But overall, this strategy will enable you to move up tiers from where you were before. In my case, I was farming as free up Orbless to Orb Devo on tier 11, and then I moved to tier 12 for Reverse Orb Devo, and now, as a combination of Wave Accelerate and Interest Sprint and increased damage from Damage Masteries, I'm doing tier 13 and will soon move to tier 14 once I have the Masteries developed a little bit further. So it's hard to say anything specific about, for example, when tier 14 becomes viable, as people's towers can greatly differ. For some, they see that once they can get their damage to about 2 trillion with Masteries and a combination of Wave Accelerate and Interest Sprint makes it viable, whereas others may have more developed Smart Missiles or Poison Swamp or stronger crowd control and may be able to achieve it sooner. The key really is to test for yourself, so test. Then let's talk briefly about improving the strategy overall. Everything covered up until now in this guide, you can obviously think of in terms of ways to improve the strategy for you, but let's cover some of these more explicitly. Because this is a sync strategy, it highly benefits from a strong golden bot. The more powerful your golden bot, the more powerful this farming strategy will be for you. Lower cooldowns while keeping Black Hole and Golden Tower and Deathwave in sync. The lower you can get your sync, the better, so you can continue to improve upon this as you continue to work on the strategy. And for your workshop, try to find a sweet spot of what level you may want your damage workshop to start at, or if you have the damage cap slider, what damage reduction you want on the slider. And then, improving substats and getting more substat slots will be of great impact, and you particularly want to ensure good substats on your Multiverse Nexus and Black Hole Digester. And then continue working on your enhancements, Free Up Plus, ELS Plus, and Coins Plus, and other such workshop enhancements will see your coin income increase further, though it may be difficult for a while to balance increasing these while trying to increase your masteries at the same time. And improving masteries such as Intersprint and Wave Accelerator will greatly help Reverse Orb Devo. And beyond those, there are of course other masteries of various kinds that can help too. And heavily related to masteries is the part about improving your damage. By getting the damage mastery, demon mode mastery, and super tower mastery, you will greatly and rapidly enhance your damage so you can take on higher tiers with Reverse Orb Devo. But also consider other ways to increase your damage, such as whether your chain lightning is lacking a bit, or if you could get some impact from labbing damage and crit factor in the labs, and so on. And leveling up your free upgrade mastery can help you lock stats as desired, such as potentially landmine chance, bounce shot chance, bounce shot range for potentially more optimized builds. And improving your crowd control, such as increasing your CF plus levels, improving your ILM and PS stuns. Those things will greatly help you improve and extend your runs and move up higher tiers. And with this strategy, you don't absolutely have to respec for tournaments, but if you're doing that, you would benefit from getting the workshop respec discount upgrade in the vault to waste less gems each week. Also, unlocking workshop presets in the vault will also enable you to make changes between farming and tournament builds even easier. But it costs a lot of keys to unlock though. Okay, so a lot has been covered and it all sounds nice, but some caveats and disclaimers of sorts are important to share. This strategy is substantially less appealing if you prefer lengthy runs or don't have the auto restart run vault upgrade. For example, imagine that you're only able to restart your game after every 8 hours, and with this strategy your runs may go down to just 3 to 4 hours. That would mean that your game risks being idle for a long time unless you have the auto restart upgrade from the vault, so keep this in mind. And this strategy will likely see you gain a reduced number of cells for a while. Due to the nature of shorter runs likely compared to what you have done previously, you may see a reduced number of cells. However, for me, coins outweigh cells, and I could anyway sustain 4x lab speeds across all. And this is also in part because you need a lot of coins to upgrade your masteries, but your situation and priorities may be different, so keep this in mind. If you're EHP and moving to this strategy as Glass Cannon, another reason that you will experience less cells initially is because you will start to kill elites very quickly, and some of these will not be tagged by Death Wave, so just keep this in mind, but I think the benefits greatly outweigh any potential negatives. And as always, just a reminder that as you try new strategies in the game, you should measure your overall average coin gains per hour and per day. Don't get too caught up in vanity metrics like coins per minute, though they can be an indicator of how your runs are performing. But what you're concerned with is how much you're able to make in an average hour and in a day. So use the tool to measure. And in relation to this, keep an eye out for a really exciting software that is just about to launch from Dizzy called Project Rand, which will really revolutionize how we track our runs going forward. And I will share more about this in a future video. And also keep in mind that when trying a new strategy, your build will generally not be optimized for it the first time you try it. So sometimes give a new strategy a few tests and tweaks before giving up on it. And if you're currently doing some perma black hole strategy and want to try this sync strategy, make sure that you do proper fair testing by also respecing your golden bot to be synced. Otherwise, you're not really comparing the strategies properly. And the same vice versa, obviously. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. If you're able to incorporate this strategy effectively, you will be monitoring your game a lot less while also seeing increased coin gains and enjoying a strategy that synergizes and aligns with your tournament focus. However, again, everyone's tower is different. Do take all the advice given here today with a grain of salt. Try tweaks that may benefit you and your tower. There are so many variables that there is never an absolute truth to anything. But hopefully this video has been helpful. Normally, I make a guide once I'm more or less fully optimized for the build as well. But what's exciting about this strategy is that there are so many ways to take it further, and I'm only scratching the surface myself, so stay tuned to see the continued progress. And lastly, a major shout out to False Hope, who has diligently worked on a great written guide of Reverse Orb Devo, and with whom I've enjoyed many discussions and learned a lot from, so be sure to check him out and give him a huge thanks or a stone back if you want to thank him for his contributions. And if this video has been helpful, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you feel like there's anything I've missed, let me know in the comments. I want to give a massive shout out to my incredible members. Your support is the backbone of everything that I do. You're the reason I can keep making videos, improving our Discord and diving deeper into this game. And so I'm genuinely so grateful for each and every one of you. Your financial contributions makes this a reality. So thank you to all the members. Bye.